Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the September 19th regular meeting of Council of the City of Parksville. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item of business I have this evening is the adoption of the minutes of the September 7th, 2016 Council meeting. And the recommendation, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Second item of business is that the September 19th Council meeting agenda be approved. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Oates. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is also carried. We have three delegations this evening. The first delegation is the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association with a request for a Memorandum of Understanding, and here this evening is the Executive Director of the Parksville Qualicum Tourism Association, Mr. Blain Sepos, and Vice-Chairperson Arthur Wong. Would you please come to the down to the front, turn the microphone on, and you have 10 minutes, gentlemen. And I believe we all have copies of the one-page draft. Okay.
Well, thanks for having us this evening. As you mentioned, Arthur and I are here to ask for council support of a MOU between local governments and our local business associations. And we see this MOU as the first step in creating a regional destination development plan for basically what would be District 69, and that's the area that we represent. Start with a really quick background on how our local tourism framework evolved. Back in the mid-90s, when Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism was started, we were basically established to counter the effects of the bypass being built. And everybody was worried that Parksville Qualicum Beach was going to turn into a ghost town. And thankfully, we were able to make sure that that didn't happen. But the environment was quite a bit different then. We had just a couple of business organizations like the Parksville Chamber of Commerce and the Qualicum Beach Chamber of Commerce. They ran visitor centers. And then there was Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism, and all we did was external marketing. We didn't do any internal work on research or anything like that. And back then, the internet was barely started, and nobody carried cell phones. So, like, just to put into perspective, that's when this tourism framework in our region was first started. Today, the tourism industry is much more competitive. I think it's safe to say that every single community in British Columbia is competing for tourism dollars. And not only do we need to keep marketing ourselves better, but we also need to give visitors the experiences they expect and the service that they expect as well. And those things tended to be outside of the parameters of what we would do as Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism or even Chambers of Commerce. And tourism is much more complex today as well. We have, as I mentioned, we have a number of business organizations that have been doing this for some time with roles in developing the tourism industry. But then we also have, as Pam bottomly behind us, we have the downtown business associations who work in and around tourism in some way or another. And we also have the Lighthouse Country Business Association that is involved in signage and brochures and what have you. And then I think it's also safe to say that our local governments are more invested in tourism as well. The city with investments in our parks and trails, RDN with bringing on more parks and trail systems than we had back in the day as well. So we all have stakeholders who have their livelihoods based on a strong tourism industry, and they expect us to work together to keep that industry strong. So we've been fortunate to be able to build off of successful planning efforts in the past that include the Community Tourism Foundations program that we started in 2007. And that was a planning process that brought together a lot of the same organizations that we're talking about in this MOU to identify a number of tactics that we saw as being key to growing our region as a tourism organization and as a destination. And that started in 2007. We did a revisit in 2009, and just last year in 2015 we did another revisit. And I'm really happy to say that we were successful with most of those tactics, that we were able to put a check mark on almost every one of those. So one more thing that I'd like to touch on before I pass it along to Arthur is that developing a mid to long-term destination development plan will also allow us to feed into a new Destination BC destination development program that they've just recently launched. They just started this process in summer, and both Mayor Lefebvre and myself are going to be a part of that process. And the way that we see this evolving is that if we don't have a plan to tie into what Destination BC is doing, as I mentioned, almost every other community in BC is actively vying for eyeballs and resources, and we need to be able to be at the forefront with a plan that we can tie into the provincial organization's plan.
Thanks, Blain. As Blain had alluded to, tourism, it's more than just the number of tourists we see throughout the year. We see quite a good portion, but there's more of an economic impact which we can attribute to tourism, such as it's a source of investment, source of potential residents, drives new business, creates jobs, generates additional tax revenues and revenue sources without tapping into resident spend. And that's only just to name a few. Currently, the partners which are listed on the MOU that are in front of you, I'm not going to read all 8 of them, but yeah, within the Municipal District 69 work well hand in hand to drive tourism. The spirit of the MOU that we're presenting is that this collaboration between the partners continues and prospers to the betterment of the community as a whole, and that we can capitalize on our fair share of the tourism pie that Blain had mentioned earlier. Most communities on Vancouver Island continue to vie for a larger chunk of this industry, and we at Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association would certainly like to see all of our partners within the region grow our share as well. The MOU is not task specific, but focuses on working together strategically to create a plan which will achieve the 3 items that are listed on the MOU, i.e. to promote, develop work plans which identifies challenges and opportunities, develops a position statement on business attraction, growth and retention strategies, and works collaboratively to link business and strategic plans as part of an overall strategy. So that's the MOU that we're presenting, and we're looking for council support on this. Thank you.
That's it. Well, thanks very much. Any questions for the delegation from members of council? I have comments to make, but I'll make them later. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. So I did speak with Arthur previous, and you've got both Chamber of Commerce's together. You've got the PQBTA support. How about the town of Qualicum? Have they signed on yet?
So far, we have all the business organization support. So we have both the downtown business associations and both the Parksville and the Qualicum Beach Chambers of Commerce. And I expect the Lighthouse Country Business Association to agree to come on this week. And we thought what we would do is we would work together with the business community first and be able to show that there's that support in the business community before we come to the local governments to ask for your support.
And so it looks like you've done a lot of the groundwork already, and I'd like to tell you that I really appreciate the work that you've done. And I don't know if you know, later on we have the Mount Biosphere doing a presentation, and have you worked with them as well? Because I think it would tie in very nicely.
Very much. I think that Monica will probably speak at length about the partnership that we've created around that specific program that you're you're talking about.
Councillor Beale?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much to Blain and to Arthur for the presentation. I am curious, these statements as to what the goals are of course fairly general and, you know, kind of vision type statements. I'm curious if you have a sense from your perspective of how much staff time might be involved with bringing this to life.
As I mentioned, that the MOU is really a first step to before we start creating this destination development plan that I've mentioned. And so at this point, we're not asking for any specific staff or resource investment. What we're looking for is a commitment to come together to plan and to have our existing plans complement each other, and the hopes that when we do come together to develop this destination development plan, that at that point, each one of the organizations will be able to say what level they'll be able to invest their time and their people resources. Because we all know from the smallest associations like Lighthouse Country Business Association that doesn't even have a paid staff person, to the city and the other local governments, that no matter how big or small your organizations are, there's limitations there. But we do feel that although that there will be an investment that's required, we think that it's going to be worth it, because tourism is the #1 economic driver of this region, and the community relies on us to keep this industry strong.
Just on that note, I was invited to attend the destination marketing meeting we had a few months ago, and I felt, given the importance of tourism to our city, that I accepted an invitation, and I accepted to continue to participate on behalf of the city. So that'll continue, and once we get going on that, I'll be giving council feedback on how things are proceeding. It's fairly preliminary at the present time. Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
I wonder if I might make a motion at this time.
Before you make a motion, does anyone have any questions for the delegation? I'd like to make some very few comments. Given the importance of tourism to the city of Parksville, which is basically a no-brainer, it's a pretty important part of our economic ripple effect in terms of revenue and the resorts that we have and the beach. I think we would be remiss when we take decisions as a council to make sure that when we're looking at it, we have to ask ourselves, what does that do, if anything, to tourism? What does that do, if anything, to the downtown? What does that do, if anything, to the businesses of the Chamber of Commerce and the businesses of downtown? And I do believe we do that. We do it almost as a matter of fact. But I think the idea of having a formula or a recognition like we do with the PDBA, that we do have an MOU and we do meet on a regular basis to talk about issues. I think, as mayor, I think it's extremely important. And one of the things that we continue to do, and I'll be at UBCM, we'll be talking to the Premier and a few ministers, and we're also going to talk about the municipal initiative, the resort municipal initiative that we don't belong to yet, and we want to belong to that because that's more revenue and it generates more revenue for our infrastructure. So it becomes extremely important. So I just wanted to mention that. So am I going to let Councillor Beale make her motion?
Yes.
I guess I am. Go ahead, Councillor Beale. Nobody else has any comments.
I would also like to add my thanks to both of the gentlemen here and the work that's been done by the Tourism Association, because it absolutely is an economic driver in our community. Now, while I appreciate that this MOU does not necessarily require or spell out much staff involvement, etc. And I also do appreciate that, of course, our council is interested in tourism and the future and the growth of tourism in our area. Nonetheless, I would like to give our staff a chance to also have a look at this and maybe formulate whether it be questions or things that need to be addressed as we move forward. So I would like to move that this be referred to staff in order to, with a request to make a report back to council, and that's my motion. I'm just also hopeful that such a request, such a motion would not take an inordinate amount of time, understanding that staff is very busy and barring any unforeseen, emergencies, that hopefully it would not take too long to get this report.
Councillor Oates.
That wasn't the motion I was expecting, I thought. So I do have a question then about the actual memorandum then. There's nothing in this memorandum that's meant to restrict the autonomy of any of the 9 partners, is there?
So to follow up on your thought process, this shouldn't take very long. Mrs. Comas, shouldn't take very long? Thank you. Okay. So the motion has been made. We have a seconder. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Thanks very much. We'll get back to you shortly. Thank you. Now, the second delegation is a presentation from the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region by Monica Shore from VIU, and our council liaison, Chris Berger. Name is vaguely familiar. We're going to come and they're going to take 10 minutes to give us 6 years of background on what's been happening with the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere. All right. So you've got 10 minutes. I know it's a long presentation, but you've got 10 minutes. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Ms. Shore, you're all queued up on this end. I see you are. Very good. Thank you very much, Council, staff, of course, Your Worship, for having us here. It's wonderful to be back in familiar territory. I will do my best and adhere to your very strict timelines. So I will then, in such a manner, pass on to Ms. Monica Shore here. She is the Mount Arrowsmith coordinator. She takes care of all things with respect to our Biosphere region and that important relationship of ours between, of course, the city of Parksville through another MOU and, of course, our university here, VIU. So, Ms. Shore, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Berger. Okay, so we're going to zip through the last 6 months together in 8.5 minutes. So a big deal for us was redoing our website. It's like Blain just spoke about. It's a key attractor to our region to have good places for people to recognize right away online from wherever they are in the world. So that was done this spring. We also participated in the RDN's first ever Water Day, and we were on the organizing committee for that, and participated through a lecture and by hosting a booth. So always trying to raise awareness in the community, being as present as possible whenever invited. Another huge event that happened in the spring was the World Congress of Biosphere Reserves. So this is organized every 4 years, and it happened to be in Lima, Peru. And what happened at that gathering was over 1,500 delegates came together from all over the world. There are 669 biosphere reserves in 120 countries. And we got together to talk about the development of our action plan for the next 10 years as a world network. And so there's a huge kind of hierarchy and bureaucracy in biosphere reserves that goes from UNESCO down here to my position as a coordinator of an individual biosphere reserve. And we need to make sure that we're all working towards some common goal. And so that was the gist of the World Congress of Biosphere Reserves, and there's more information on our website. We did present at 3 different sessions there, so Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, mentioning all municipalities and communities involved, was really present on the world stage and I think made a big impact. Okay. Still in the spring, we had our annual general meeting, which I was able to attend in Winnipeg. A big success for us is that I was elected to the executive committee of the Canadian Biosphere Reserve Association. So Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region is now at the decision-making table of the Canadian Biosphere Reserve Group. One of the things we're working on right now is applying for federal funding from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And and that is going to the federal government this very month. And we're also participating as leaders in the Indigenous Working Group, along with members from Clayoquot Sound Biosphere Reserve. So making headway on sort of the commitment in biosphere reserves to work towards reconciliation in our communities and climate change mitigation and adaptation. So doing a lot within our research institute and doing a lot just in collaboration with our local First Nations. We also had the BioBlitz, our first annual BioBlitz in the region in April. And a BioBlitz is a citizen science event. It engages people of all ages to come together to gather data to help us understand what biodiversity looks like in our region. And it's done every year so that we can understand over time how things are changing. And the idea of a BioBlitz is to have different levels of participation, so to get youth to come and learn about how do you count plants? How do you keep track of how many different species there are? What are some of the simple scientific methods that you can use that even kids understand, so that we're training our youth to become active stewards of the land. And so we're going to be doing this every year. Our home base will be Milner Gardens, and we'll be expanding out to different parts of the region. We also have technical advisory committees. So some people say, how can I get involved in research with the Biosphere region? Well, VIU has a research institute affiliated with it, and community members are encouraged to become part of technical advisory committees, which involve knowledge holders, experts, VIU faculty, people that know things about the research that we're doing. And so there's sort of arm's length advisory boards come together every couple of months or so. So we've been out in the community doing lectures as well. We're actually, for the next 3 weeks, we'll be doing a VIU Elder College course. We had our first class on Friday. It was very successful, sold out at 24 people in the class. And it's about creating champions in the community to go out and explain what is a biosphere reserve. How do you explain that to somebody without their eyes glazing over? We're trying to change that. Doing things like documentaries and radio interviews, and getting on CBC the other week, which was great. Another thing to get the community to know who we are and to feel like we're a hip organization as well as an important one is making sure that our branding is good. And so we were offered the Good Neighbor Award by Backyard Creative this spring, meaning they redid our logo for free. And you can see the old logo that existed since the beginning of the Biosphere Reserve. And in changing our name about a year ago to the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, it was another reason to change our logo. The word reserve had negative connotations for our Indigenous partners and implies that the area is reserved for one particular use, which it's not. So while Canada's lagging behind a little bit, although having the discussion about changing that word reserve to region, we decided to go ahead and do it ourselves. So research happens in the summer. Why? Because MABR is sort of a student-led research institute at VIU. And so when students get off class in April, they then have 4 months of free time where they can work full-time at the research institute. And so you can find out all of the project descriptions on the website for the Research Institute, which you have before you, mabr.viu.ca. And yes, there are supposed to be 2 R's in that URL. And so the 4 main projects this summer were lake monitoring, which was a project done with the Regional District of Nanaimo, wetland monitoring and mapping, eelgrass mapping, and the development of an app that the community will be able to use to do environmental monitoring. And so you'll be able to find out a lot on that website, which is updated on a regular basis by our Research Institute team. You recognize yourselves, some of you in this photo. The roundtable. This is an important update. We are expanding. It's taken a year to establish a really functioning, positive atmosphere at the roundtable, which is the governing body of the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region. Parksville is there with Mayor Lefebvre and Chris Berger in attendance, and and we have our First Nations, and we have the forestry companies. It's a really interesting group of people that doesn't usually get together to have conversations about the broader future of our region. And we're doing it, and it's not contentious. It's really positive, and it's a wonderful way to keep the conversations going about our future. So the call right now is between now and October the 1st to community members, residents, to apply to become part of the roundtable. All the information is on our website, but you can also email me at the address here. We're looking for people who are involved in residents associations, environmental stewardship organizations, youth advocacy groups, or just youth in general, food security, tourism, and other important initiatives that are around the health and well-being of wildlife people in this region. And for terms of reference, they're attached to the application form, which are on our website. And I hope I still have a couple of minutes to really feature this last project that Blain foreshadowed and that we're actually launching right now. So, Amazing Places. It's a partnership between the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region, Destination British Columbia, and the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, with some support from Vancouver Island University as well. It's a national initiative. It's called Amazing Places, and it connects people and nature across Canada's 18 biosphere reserves. And so through an online nomination process that's now open, you go to mabr.ca/amazingplaces, and you'll just keep seeing this URL on all the slides that I show you. This is where you go right now until the end of this month to nominate a place that you find amazing. And I will explain what I mean by amazing in a moment. We're trying to raise awareness about places that have ecological significance within the region. And what is an amazing place? It could be a natural vista, a trail that invites you to experience the beauty of the region, or simply a special place in nature that you like to share with others. So we're asking people to think about where they feel most connected to nature within this region, and you can see a map of the region here. So it's not just specifically Parksville, but as experts in Parksville, I encourage you to think about the places that you would like to have as part of this promotional campaign. So there are 3 criteria for nominating Amazing Places. You think it's amazing. It's publicly accessible. We want to promote places that can handle also carrying more people on them, and people have biological needs, and we don't want to be creating environmental damage. So is it publicly accessible, and are there washrooms? Think about things like that. And does it have ecological significance? Well, that's an obvious one. Most places do in this region. But you can think about things like, does it also have potentially some cultural significance, or is it socially important for this region? So those are your guidelines when you're going on to nominate Amazing Places. So from the public nomination process, there are 10 Amazing Places that will be selected by myself and Michelle Harnett, who's the project coordinator for Amazing Places, with Blain, Sepos as well on that committee, and whoever is the land owner or land manager of that area. So if it's a City of Parksville Municipal Park, for example, that gets nominated, we will be in conversation with you about making that place ready for what's to come. So what's to come? It would be interpretive signage on a really beautiful kind of slanted plaque that Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism is already using for its historical places campaign, I'll call it, for lack of a better word. So it's going to be consistent across the region. You'll see all these different beautiful signs. We'll have high-quality videography and photography that will be available on a national website as well as on a locally based website. So we're promoting the region. We're not creating we're not creating unwanted exploration of places that are privately owned, for example. We're not going to be asking people to nominate their backyards, as lovely as they may be. So a little bit of history, and then we're done. The Amazing Places project began in Fundy Biosphere Reserve, which is in New Brunswick, in 2010. And it has since been adopted by 3 biosphere reserves in Ontario, and we, the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region, are the first to bring it across the country to British Columbia. We even beat Clayoquot Sound, who had a $12 million endowment fund to start off their biosphere reserve. So we're really proud about this initiative. It's really great to be working with partners like Blain and like the City of Parksville, and we're very hopeful that this will be something that you're proud of and want to jump on board with. So Thanks so much to all partners. And please, if anything, after this night, go to the website and nominate an amazing place. It's not just one place. You can nominate as many as you'd like, and then stay tuned for which ones get picked. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent presentation covering a lot of things over a very short period of time. And just a note to Mr. Sepos, who sits on that committee, that we've got a pretty nice beach here in Parksville, and they want us to sign an MOU. I just thought I'd place that. Any questions for the delegation from members of council? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I don't have any questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was just thinking back as you were doing it where it was when I first started on council, and the distance that it's traveled and the credibility that it's gained, like the whole Biosphere. I want to congratulate you on that. It's amazing. Nobody knew what the Biosphere was. Nobody knew what the role was. You've taken it all and put it together so it's understandable, and I want to thank you. That's huge.
Thank you very much.
Your Worship, could I follow up on Councillor Powell's comments? Because I just wanted to reiterate that's
Do I
been
have a choice?
Absolutely, absolutely you do. But since you brought up the topic, and since I am in effect, Council, your eyes and ears with this organization, I just want to reiterate that's exactly the case, and it's really been to the credit of VIU and to individuals like Ms. Shore here who have taken this ball and really run with it. I mean, they created a research institute around this. They have students employed in actual research in the field. Those roundtables, we have all the key landowners are at those meetings now, as well as Indigenous First Nations people, having really good, straightforward conversations with one another about the future and sustainability in this region. So we were very fortunate, I think, in having the university step up when it did, and the results really do show themselves.
Once again, you stole my speech. That's okay. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, thank you very much for your presentation. And on a personal note, I was up on top of Mount Arrowsmith 2 weekends ago. And truly, as I was up there and looking out towards the Strait and the Salish Sea, I was thinking, and this is all part of the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region, and really, and when you think that, you know, a while ago people wouldn't have necessarily thought about that, and knowing more about it, it made me think about not only the land and the water and the trees and the people and how we live in this incredible area. So great credit to you and the organization of VIU.
Any other members of council have any comments or questions for the delegation? I'd just like to conclude based on my colleague, Mr. I forget your name now. Mr. Berger. No, but I was invited to sit on this committee on behalf of the City of Parksville, and VIU has done a tremendous job. You know, Mr. Berger's mentioned all of the participants, and everybody's there. The First Nations are there, the timber companies are there. You know, the research folk are there, Dr. Shaw and Mr. Whitty. It's a great organization. It's a great pleasure to go to those meetings because there's so much happening and there's so much good feedback that we're getting from everybody around the table. It works very, very well. So we'll look forward to future updates in the next 6 months or 7 months. Thank you. Thank you for coming. The next delegation is going to take a while to get down here. He's sitting way in the back. Mr. Al Dakota. Mr. Dakota is the, you're no longer, are you still the owner of the terminal auto body? Almost still, pretty much? Okay. And Mr. Dakota is going to talk to us about, we all have your report. Thank you very much. So Mr. Dakota is going to talk about the request to backfill a ditch on a city easement. So you have the floor, sir. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, City staff, thanks for the time to come here to address this issue that I have. I've owned the property at 440 East Island Highway since 1986. The city does have a 3-meter easement running along the side. If you look at the second page, there's a picture or a diagram of what the property is, and the faint line that you can see along the far side of the property is a 3-meter easement that the city has. It's my property, but the city has an easement to be able to go through and do work or upgrades for, basically it was drainage. In 1988, Bello Chomor, who was the city man, he was the man in charge, and I really apologize if I butchered his last name. There's not many of you who would remember him, but he was a great guy. He came and informed me that the ditch was going to be filled in, and he set a date for it. For some reason, it had to be postponed. I'm not sure whether it was a manpower issue or equipment, but it had to be postponed, and it's still never been done.
That's Mr. Tromor's fault. We'll blame it on him.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was not placing blame. About 7 years ago, I approached the city and asked if I could fill in the ditch. Personally, I just wanted to do it myself. After much dialogue, the city decided that an outside engineer plan was required before the ditch could be filled in. I'm not sure what it cost for the city for those drawings, but I was told that it would be approximately $25,000 to fill in the ditch. Today I'm coming to you, and I'm going to throw this out there right now. It's going to cost me about $6,500, and I am prepared to fill in the ditch. Each year I have to call the city. If I'm lucky, I get the ditch mowed 2 times a year, and you'll see the picture. The first picture that you have there is of terminal auto body. The second picture is of complete windows. I did used to own that property, but I have since sold it. And right between those 2 great-looking buildings is this lovely ditch that the city has an easement on. It is my property, but the city does hold an easement. The second picture of the ditch shows you how nice it looks as well. The final picture is a picture of some drainage that they've done up by Island Golf Carts. I'm not sure what the name of the company is now. I think it's Island Golf Cars up in Arrington. And they're doing all their ditches the same way that I propose that we fill in our ditch. It's a 12-inch perforated pipe with varying degrees of gravel set on top of it so that it looks nice, it's finished. The city will never have to come and mow my lawn again. On October, there is concern, or the city was concerned about flooding there. Well, on September 3rd of 2013, we had an epic rainstorm here. It was phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think anybody in this room has. And we had 32 millimeters of rain fall in 22 minutes. It flooded the downtown. I came down to Terminal Auto Body that night because I was concerned for flooding at the shop and the property next door. The ditch was taking the water away well. There was no flooding. There was no problem. And in owning that property for 30 years, I've never seen an issue with the capacity of the 12-inch pipe. That's mostly, that ditch is mostly, that easement is mostly filled in, which I did over the years. Just on my own, I never asked. I didn't know I had to ask permission to do it, but over the years I filled in a large portion of it, and now we've got a 12-inch culvert at one end, a 12-inch culvert where it goes into the city drainage, and I simply want to put in another 12-inch culvert to fill in that ugliness that's beside these 2 nice buildings. And just a little reminder, open ditches are rat infested, and there's no standing water in mine, but if there were, it would also be mosquito infestation. So I would just like the city's permission to fill in that ditch at my expense and be done with the nonsense. Have a nice looking piece of downtown Parksville. Thousands of people drive by there every day, and it's a reflection on my business, it's a reflection on me, it's a reflection on the city, because that's one of the last open ditches we have.
Thank you, Mr. Dakota. Any questions for Mr. Dakota from members of council? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. And so you talked about we had a consultant and it would cost you $25,000 to fill in the ditch, and you said right now it would cost you $6,500. Is that because you're not going to do it to the standard they wanted and you're just going to fill it in, or has the amount changed?
No, it's perspective. It's what is really needed, and what they're asking for are 2 different things. It's a simple thing. I mean, the ditch is filled in for the most part. There might be 150 feet of the property that isn't filled in, and like I said, it's a 12-inch drain at one end, or 12-inch culvert at one end, a 12-inch culvert at the other end. It's taking the water. I'm simply asking permission to fix up a piece of ugliness that's there. I don't know what the city wanted to do for $25,000, but I had no intention of spending that kind of money to do what I knew would be a lot less. And if I get the approval to do this, it'll be done within a couple of weeks. It'll look beautiful, and it will take the water away.
Yes, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the Director of Engineering. And so, can you talk to me about the 12-inch pipes at both ends, and what is the issue with him putting in a 12-inch pipe and filling in the ditch?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell. I am aware of some of the history. Obviously, is before I got here with the city, but I have some information that goes back to 2006, I think. And there were some letters that were put forward from the previous engineer, as Mr. Descoteau is saying, there was an agreement at the time for the city. The city decided to do some engineering just to determine what was required there, and that's where a drawing was created by a local engineering company to see what it would take to fill the ditch. And I don't have any numbers in terms of the 25,000. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. But I guess that's what I know. The bottom line is the city needs to do it to our standards. There is some complications there with the one of the buildings. A lot of the drains are coming straight out of the adjacent building, adjacent to that 3-meter right-of-way. There's drains coming out of the foundation that need to be taken care of. It's not just a fill operation. Those need to be picked up. It's a little complicated in that they dump directly into the ditch, so that the engineered design addresses all that. And that was back in 2006, where the full length of the ditch was exposed. Sometime between then and now, part of as Mr. Descoteau said, part of that ditch was filled in, and I don't have any information on anyone at the city that was aware of that being filled in. But anyways, if I could make a suggestion, if I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell. What I could do is in a report kind of summarize what we do know, dig in the files a little bit more to try to understand some of these dates that I haven't seen this. This is the first time I've seen this information. Try to dig into some of the dates and come back to council with a report that kind of outlines some perspective on the situation, and then council would be able to be fully informed and decide at that time what you want to do.
Do we need a motion on that?
I want to go to, before any motions, I want to go to Councillor Salter. Councillor Salter, you have a comment or a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I'm just wondering, and maybe Mr. Figuera will respond to this in his report if we have one, but I think what we're looking at is something that's fairly historical. I mean, it's kind of grandfathered here, and we're talking 1988 from that building, and so the pipe's going into the ditch. I'm going to assume that occurred when that building was put up a long time ago. And the fact that we have many buildings that are in Parksville that are that old, and so the standard was different at the time, and so I can see the difficulty in this. The 25,000. Who's footing the bill in that? Do we know who was supposed to pay this 25,000 for this?
Mr. Descoteau?
I don't think that was a number. Like 10 years ago when I first started down this road, I wanted to get it done, and that was the number that was bandied around. I honestly don't know where it came from, but that's the number that's always been in my head, and I just thought that was outrageous, because what we're doing here is, I guarantee you, and if you want a letter of guarantee, I'll guarantee that there's never going to be a problem with this ditch. We could talk about it till the cows come home, but honestly, it's a straightforward thing that I'm asking to do. We'll get those downspouts from the building next door, even though it's not my responsibility. We will tie them into the drainage, and we'll make sure that it's looked after. This is not rocket science. This is enclosing an escapement for water.
Thank you. I just was wondering, though, a follow-up, yeah? I was just wondering, though, who is it? Who was supposed to pay that cost, though? That 25, was that the city or, yeah?
Mr. Figuera?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter. As far as I can tell, the deal was that the city would pay for the design and the Descoteau would pay for, the owner of the property would pay for the materials and construction, as far as I can tell.
Mr. Councillor Oates.
So why is this before council tonight? I'm wondering why. It seems to me that the last attempt to have this done was the owner approached the city, from what I gather, 7 years ago. If I owned a property and I wanted to fill in the ditch, I think I'd just go to the planning department and ask for permission to do that. So I'm confused as to why it's in front of council if that step hasn't been taken. Or did I miss something? Did I miss something in the correspondence or something? Or
go ahead, Mr.
When was the last time you asked the city for this?
The last time I asked for the city for this was 10 years ago. You said 2006, I believe, is what Wong said. And we came to a stalemate. I would have been happy to pay for it, but I thought the price tag that I said, give me a ballpark. I forget who I asked. Mike, was it you? I asked somebody to ballpark what this was going to cost, and they said about $25,000, and I thought it was usury.
I think we should be dealing with facts from 2016, not 2006.
Thank you.
I suggest you make application to the city to do what you do. If you reach roadblocks there, then you come back to council. But until you reach a roadblock, don't assume that one exists.
So there is one here.
Well, in order for us to deal with that, we'd have to have that clearly identified to us, where you've made your application, it's been refused by city, and then you ask the council to intervene. Unless I'm missing something, am I missing the process? Did something happen? Did I miss a meeting or something?
Mr. Descoteau and I had a meeting a few months ago, and Mr. Descoteau wanted to know what he could do or what could be done, and I explained to him that we'd have to go back and get the drawings. He was not receptive to that. He wanted to come to council, so I suggested he come to council, and here he is tonight. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to make a motion to refer this to staff to come back with a report, and I'd like to see the report back in a timely manner, say mid-October. Is that possible? Oh, first of all, let's do the motion.
The motion, Councillor Salter. Discussion on the motion. The comment I'd like to make is that we've been told tonight that 30 years ago this thing existed, and there's never been any flooding. So I would like to know if when staff make their comments about cost and that sort of thing in terms of what Mr. Descoteau is offering, why would there, if it hasn't flooded in 30 years, why would it flood in future years as part of that report? That's a friendly amendment, by the way. Yeah. Okay. Okay with that? All right. Any further discussion on the motion? Being none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Thanks very much for coming. Okay, Council, we're moving on to reports. Mr. Figuera, I need an asset management policy number 6.17. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Do I have that? Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Mr. Figuera, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding asset management policy number 6.17?
If I may, Your Worship, before Council is a report to obtain the Council direction for formal adoption of asset management policy number 6.17. This report and policy are a result of Council Resolution 16-141 on June the 6th, 2016, directing staff to create an asset management policy for Council's consideration. Staffs have reviewed the policy to ensure that it reflects the city's vision and mission, is consistent with other jurisdictions' policy, has clear principles, roles, actions, and responsibilities, and fulfills expectations from the senior governments. It is staff's contention that the policy will send a strong message to senior governments that the City of Parksville is serious about life cycle management of our assets, and it puts the city in the best position possible to continue to be eligible for senior government funding. The recommendations are as per the report.
questions for Mr. Figuera from Council? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. So if we approve this, you guarantee we're going to get grant money?
If I may, Your Worship. Can't guarantee, but without it, it's going to be a challenge. There you go.
Any further questions for Mr. Figuera? One of the important aspects of this, we were at FCM, Councillor Patterson and myself back in June in Winnipeg, and this came up. This was one of the big topics, and I believe that this fits in well with the 5, 10, 15, and 20-year capital infrastructure replacement and renewal program we have, which is very key. We have over 300 kilometers of pipes and water pipes and sewer pipes and sidewalks and roads and that sort of thing. So this becomes, from my perspective, fairly critical in terms of adopting this type of a policy, and of course working towards it and working with it. We got budget discussions coming up. There will be infrastructure replacement and renewal projects there, and then of course we're looking at promise of infrastructure money from the federal government, this new federal government. So pretty important that we would adopt this, in my opinion. And I think that for the future, in terms of where we're going as a city, it's very important to keep that in mind. The infrastructure is not going to go away. We're going to have to do some repair and replacement on an ongoing basis, given all we have. So, any further questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Powell.
On a more serious note, on page 23, we talk about policies, policy principles, guideline, and practices. In the first paragraph of that subtitle, it talks about civic facilities. So I'm assuming that's the PCCC. Now, is the operating agreement set up that we're able to count that, or does that matter? You know what I'm saying or asking?
If I may, Your Worship, this would be any facilities that the city owns and maintains. Right. So.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the two recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. Next report is the 2016 fall grant and aid applications. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Beale. I would select, the last time I'm told that it was Councillor Oates and Councillor Oates and who else? Okay, so Councillor Oates and Councillor Beale? Thank you. So I would recommend now that would be Councillor Salter and Councillor Patterson. Councillor Powell would be the councillors to vet this. No?
Your Worship, Councillor Oates and Councillor Beale are
it's their turn. Oh, it's their turn. I thought they had just had their turn. Oh, speak so softly, Mrs. Keller. All right, so I will nominate Councillor Oates and Councillor Beale to do this tough task. I have a mover and a seconder. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And I missed Councillor Greer, who would be saying he'd probably vote against it. But anyway, he's not here, and we still miss him. All right. The next issue is the City of Parksville as a living wage employer. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Mrs. Kaler, would you please give us the background on this issue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In June of 2016, Council directed staff to become a living wage employer and report back to Council as to how this was going to be implemented. The City is currently a living wage employer, as all union and exempt staff are paid higher than the living wage for this region, which is currently $16.76 per hour. A clause in the City's current collective agreement with QP Local 401 also commits to paying contractors, subcontractors, and service providers at established union rates. In addition to the wage rates for employees and contractors, The June Council resolution indicated to staff that Council was also interested in promoting the concept of a living wage beyond the city's pay rates, so staff has included some options for Council to consider. The first option would be to establish a living wage webpage on the city's website, which explains the concept of a living wage and highlights its benefits to the community. And the second or combined option is to consider adopting a living wage policy to indicate how the city is a living wage employer. Should Council decide to pursue either or both of these options, a resolution to that effect will be needed. And our recommendation is per the agenda.
Thank you. Questions for Mrs. Keeler? Any comments on this particular motion? I think we discussed it at great length the first time it came up. Okay, so seeing no question. No, I do see a question. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I would select option 2, direct staff to finalize the attached policy for council adoption.
Do we have to receive it for information first? Okay.
Yes, please, Your
So
Worship.
that's the motion that's on the floor. So on the motion that the council will receive it as a recommend be received for information. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. So, Councillor Powell, would you?
I would like to make a motion that we go with option 2, direct staff to finalize the attached policy for council adoption.
A seconder for that? Councillor Oates. Discussion on that motion. Oates.
First, I'd like to thank staff for putting together such a comprehensive policy. In large part, I have no questions or comments. There's only one under the implementation and enforcement, page 36 of the agenda. The 6B, the worker services are being provided for a period of 7 hours or longer per occasion. Could I get staff's thinking on the reasoning behind putting in that 7-hour criteria?
Mrs. Keeler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Oates. Specifically when I was putting the 7 hours in, I was thinking of things that we were basically just having somebody drop something off at the city. So catering, for example, where there isn't a person present at our site for a day. And so in those cases, we typically would order things from a menu that is a set price and have less control over the wages that are paid. For example, if we were to order Panago pizza for a staff event, we wouldn't necessarily be able to influence how the employer pays their wages for those staff. But typically when somebody is working here for more than a day, we would get a request for different quotes. We would put it out to tender, and it would be a more formal arrangement where we would expect to have more control over the cost of labor associated with that.
Thank you. That's a reasonable explanation.
Any further questions for Mrs. Keeler? Any further comments? Okay, as I said, we've discussed this a few months ago, and it was at great length, and everybody had their comments. So I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Okay. Once again, Mrs. Keeler, I need a mover and a seconder for the report on the Parksville Community and Conference Center business analysis, and that the report be received for information. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. Mrs. Keeler, would you please give us the background on this issue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is to present the findings from the business analysis produced by KPMG, and the document is quite lengthy, over 70 pages, and so it is attached to a link on our city website, but there are just some highlights which I extracted from the report attached for council, and the recommendation is to receive the report for information.
Before I make any comments, I'm going to ask Councillor Oates, who's the council representative to the PCCC, if he wants to make any comments at this point in time. Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will take the opportunity to make a couple of comments. This report that Council commissioned from KPMG, while it wasn't required for us to bring it before a public meeting, we made the decision early on that we would because it's a city-owned facility. I'm happy that the report was as comprehensive as it appears to be, although I must say there's not a lot of surprises in there in the report from my perspective. It may be argued that we abdicated some of our duties to KPMG to do something that council should have done, and perhaps were I to vote again today, I may have had a different decision about doing this. However, we do have the report in front of us. The report does confirm an awful lot of what I thought originally. I do believe that the conference center issues, if any issues exist, and that depends on who you talk to, can be resolved one or two ways. The most simplistic way, perhaps, would be to increase revenue. That would relieve a lot of concerns. But I argue a more realistic and more appreciative way would be to increase usership. If that facility were being used as a community center, I believe there would be less and less people complaining about the amount of money that the city puts in there. I do, however, agree that it was important, especially for me as a new councillor, to appreciate that the $250,000, the excess of the $250,000 that we put into it each year is, for all intents and purposes, deemed as a good use of the taxpayers' money by the KPMG group. I think it's the cost of doing business. I think that if we wish the community center to be something other than what it is, then we need to make concrete steps to make that happen. And with that, I'm pleased that the report echoes a lot of what I thought before. It is what it is, I guess. I'm glad that the report is here, and I'm glad that we now we have something substantive to benchmark it against.
Thank you. And just follow up on Councillor Oates' comments. There's a consensus by this council and by the board that it's a community center. If you look at conference centers across the island, none of them are doing very well, and we have evidence of that in the report, starting with Victoria, Nanaimo, Campbell River, Qualicum Beach. Nobody's doing that much greater as a conference center than we are presently at that time. So the focus will be on emphasizing that it's a community center first and foremost. The other thing that's going to be happening in terms of the work that will follow forward, we've had meetings. We've had a couple of meetings with the board, council, and we are now proceeding. We will be proceeding. The council will be proceeding to write an operating agreement based on the recommendations in the report, and we'll be asking the board to look at rewriting some of the policy agreements based on what the operating agreement will say. We're expecting, we want a new operating agreement. The objective is to have a new operating agreement in place, signed by January 1st, 2017. And we're going to be working very hard towards that. Staff will be assisting on that, and we'll report back at council from time to time. So on that note, unless anybody has any further comments or questions, I'm going to call the vote on the recommendation that the report be received for information. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, this is a very sad time for me. We need an appointment of a temporary deputy corporate office, which means that the mayor's office loses a very able administrative assistant. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. I might vote against it. Councillor Powell, seconded by, I need a seconder, Councillor Patterson. Mrs. Kaler, would you please provide a report on the background on this particular issue that affects the mayor on a daily basis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Council is aware, the City welcomed one of its newest citizens last week, which has led to a temporary vacancy in the Deputy Corporate Officer position. The City is very fortunate to have an internal employee who has proven herself to be a dedicated and thoughtful member of staff, and who is willing to take on the role of the Deputy Corporate Officer during the incumbent's maternity and parental leave. It is anticipated that Sarah Ross will cover this position for a period of approximately 1 year until the return of the incumbent next fall. and recommendations are per the agenda.
Councillor Beal? No, you had your hand up. Oh. Mover and a seconder, don't we? Yes, we do. Okay. Do I have to call the question? All those in opposed? Thank you. That is carried. All right. The next item, the next report is a report on the staffing requirements for 2017, and I hope we won't be discussing this evening because this could go all night. This is to get everybody a heads up for the 2017 budget discussions that are going to start next month. Mrs. Comas, first of all, I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beal. Mrs. Comas, would you please give us the background on this very lengthy issue?
Well, Your Worship, you are correct when you say that this is a heads up. We are beginning to work on the 2017 budget, and as Council knows from previous reports, we will be getting our public engagement process in November. And so I wanted to provide Council with some information ahead of time to give you an opportunity for consideration and thinking, and if you have questions that you would like to bring forward in the budget discussion, to do so. The various departments will be bringing forward their spending packages for these positions, and it's basically a precursor to the discussion that will be held at that point in time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Comas? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Will this document also be attached to the budgeting process so we'll have a copy of it?
We certainly can do that.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mrs. Comas on this particular subject? It's just being given to us in advance of the 2017 budget discussions, which begin next month, as I said earlier. Seeing no further questions or any comments, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The next item, the next report is the Vancouver Island Regional Library lease renewal. 3 recommendations. I need a mover and a seconder for the 3 recommendations. Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Powell. Mrs. Comas, once again, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding the Vancouver Island Regional Library lease renewal?
Yes, Your Worship. Basically, it's that time of year. The lease with the library has come up for its final renewal before a complete renegotiation of the lease. The library staff have reviewed the lease and are in agreement with the terms and conditions as set out in the report, and would request Council's consideration of adoption. The recommendations are as per the agenda.
Pretty straightforward report. Any questions for Mrs. Comas? My goodness, everybody's quiet tonight. All right, seeing no questions or comments, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the 3 recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, we're moving on to bylaws, and we have a final adoption. I need a mover and a seconder for the temporary boring bylaw 2016, number 1532. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Patterson. No questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. All right, we're moving on to new business, and I'm going to give Councillor Oates. I know he has a motion. Would you care to start off the new business?
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. I have a motion of Olympic proportions. I move that September 23rd, 2016 be proclaimed Michelle Stilwell Day in the city of Parksville in recognition of Ms. Stilwell's outstanding sporting achievements and gold medals earned in the 2016 Paralympic Games, and further move that $250 be allocated from the Council Contingency Fund for the cost of a temporary sign to be placed at the entrance to the city congratulating Michelle Stilwell upon her return home from the 2016 Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And just briefly, she won her 5th Paralympic gold medal and 6 gold medals in the 400-meter wheelchair race at the Olympic Games, in the Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro on Saturday. and again on the 100-meter event last Saturday again. We're very, 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 very lucky to have an international world-class athlete like that in our community, and we should be celebrating that every chance we get. So I would like to get full unanimous support of Council on this motion, please.
You've got a seconder by Councillor Powell. Any further comments on the recommendation? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. I would like to, based on that, I'm going to read a proclamation of Michelle Stilwell Day. Whereas the City of Parksville wishes to honor Parksville resident Michelle Stilwell for outstanding achievements in sport and in life, and deem it an honor and a pleasure to acknowledge Michelle as one of this city's shining stars. And whereas Michelle Stilwell is a Canadian Paralympic champion, earning medals at the 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016 Paralympics. And whereas Michelle Stilwell, through her individual efforts and her dedication and commitment to Canadian sport and athleticism, is a true inspiration to others. And whereas Michelle Stilwell is willing to share her experiences of perseverance and her message of optimism and resilience, now therefore we, the Council of the City of Parksville, do hereby proclaim Friday, September 23rd, 2016 as Michelle Stilwell Day in the City of Parksville, and urge our citizens to recognize the exceptional achievements of Michelle Stilwell. Thank you. Councillor Oates, any further items under new business?
None, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I have two items. First of all, reference to the library. Something that's been done fairly recently with the Vancouver Island Regional Library is that an economic analysis has been made of the library. This is not something that has been done before here, although it has been in place in the eastern part of the country and also in the United States. And I wish Al was here tonight because I have the full report which outlines the methodology, etc. But the economic impact of the library is that there is actually a 335% return on investment. So this takes into consideration such things as what would it cost you if you didn't have those services of the library, be it the books, the internet, and the information, etc. And for every $1 invested, customers receive $5.36 in value. Now, the economic analysis did go on beyond that to looking at local impact, etc. But I thought that was nice news to share. Also, another item is that last week I did attend a 4-day conference called Pro Bike, Pro Walk, Pro Bike, Pro Place in Vancouver with a focus on active transportation and placemaking and the value of that in our communities, and also some of the more technical aspects such as better ways to do it, best practices, and how to go about implementing these things. It was also an opportunity to meet a number of professionals working in this area, including a number from the City of Vancouver who have in fact extended an invitation that if our senior engineers or others working in this area interested in learning more are welcome to go over and meet with them personally to learn from them. That is what they had to do when they made their plans for their city. They met with people in Copenhagen and other areas where this work has been done. So there's very much a willingness to share expertise and learn from past practice and current efforts. Also, when we think about active transportation, there are just so many benefits to this. Mobility, active transportation, and placemaking contributes to better health, to better social connection. It reduces vehicular congestion, reduces CO2 levels. It's good for the local economy, and it actually makes people happier. People report being happier when they have been involved with active transportation. So I think that as a city that values we want to maintain and enhance personal well-being for our citizens, I think it's something that we will want to explore further. So I don't have a very detailed report right now, but I do want to go through all this stuff that I did take notes on and received information about and prepare something for at a future date.
Thank you. Councillor Powell. I have a few things to talk about. We just heard the good news about the city of Parksville with regards to Michelle Stillwell, and it is very, very good news. There's a little bit of bad news, unfortunately. About a week and a half ago, the city of Parksville lost a business person who was totally dedicated to not only his business in Parksville, but to NGOs and other organizations. Very helpful, and that's John Rockley. And I wanted to publicly express my sympathies. I've known John for many, many years, and I was very, very shocked, I'm sure as everybody was, of his untimely passing as a result of a car accident. And he'll be missed. He'll be missed in the city as a business person, and express our sympathies to his family and all of his friends. Next week, Council, as we all know, we're going to UBCM. I will have for you the times that we're meeting with ministers. We're not going with any particular demand in hand. We're going to be meeting with the Premier and Minister Fassbender separately with regards to the letter that we've just written to the Premier and Minister Fassbender regarding the modification that we want to make to the Local Government Act with regards to having to hold a referendum for potable water. We'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about, to the Premier especially, the lack of doctors in the area. And we have a report for that, and I'll get that to you. It'll be in your packages by the end of the week. The next ministers that we're meeting with Minister Lake, specifically with regards to doctor shortages in the Oceanside area and Parksville. And then we're going to be meeting with Minister Stone and Minister Thompson with regard to some of the transportation issues that we have and some of the foreshore issues that we have with regards to some of the bottlenecks we've encountered in terms of being able to break some of those bottlenecks and get some of that work done no later than next spring, next summer. So you'll all have those reports, which are, I guess I would put them in the category of bringing to their attention some changes that have to be made. And it's not changes that are humongous with regards to requiring, like the case of the referendum, but simply some changes we need to make locally that are affecting some of our projects and not being able to get them done. So you'll hear more about that between now and the end of the week. Councillor Salter, nothing. What happened to your arm? Oh, okay. Don't tell us under new business. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the liaison for the Oceanside Accessibility Association, we met last week. Had a really good meeting. Some new people coming on board. Some of the questions on that came up in regards to that they've been asked was one from actually the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association on where handicap parking spots were throughout the city, and that to be able to give and feature on some of their maps and things like that. They are looking for a new coordinator to help with the website and getting some information and everything out. A couple members went to Nanaimo and took part in one of the rowboats that where you can put a wheelchair directly onto it. It's kind of like a kayak type, and they're hoping to have it come to Parksville. One of the topics of conversation was to chat with the Parksville Beach Fest Society and seeing about having an accessibility component added into their festivals, whereas there's lots of music and there's lots of different things in that happen during that 3 week. It would be really great to be able to showcase to other people to be able to get around. one of the comments was that we do have quite a few visually impaired type people that perhaps on that last day of competition that they could come in, and because they are visually impaired, but to actually come and touch some of those sound features and everything before they're being bulldozed down on the last day. And so I'm optimistic that that could occur. This Wednesday I have our Oceanside Development and Construction Association meeting, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of the construction changes that seem to be coming down towards us. And with our youth in our community, the Civic Actions Group. Now, they meet on Wednesdays, where I end up having 2 meetings that conflict every month, so I don't get to see them as much as I would like to. But they have at least 8 projects on the go right now, and they're just freaking amazing. Sorry. They work with one of the Rotary clubs as well in town, the Morning Club, so they have a Rotary Interact type club, and they do work in other countries and that as well. So we are just so fortunate to have some really amazing students. On that note, I'm going to go back to, I also attended the PDBA mixer and that last week, which wasn't necessarily a liaison position, but I got to hear the youth ambassadors give their report again. They gave it at the city level, but gave it towards business members and everything in the downtown core, and different questions that came up, which was really interesting. And just to start the conversation and everything for the Christmas light up. It's never too early to think about Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to invite the Paralympic wheelchair folk to come to Parksville and use our beach as a showcase?
We're hoping to.
Okay, good.
That would be one of my. And I'm sorry, I think I've missed one other group. I'll think about it after. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would gather that Ms. Bottomley is going to give us a report when we meet offline about the extra questions that came up that we didn't get at council. We'll hear about that. Oh, okay. You weren't taking notes? All right. Okay, on that note, folks, I need a mover and a seconder to, pursuant to Section 91C and E of the Community Charter, Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider items related to labor and land. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beal. We are now going into camera.